Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Puzzled Minds podcast. Today is the part two of the religious conversation that we had previously promised you guys last week. Today, we have Chris from the Beyond Binary Thinking podcast, and he's going to talk today about his journey from going from religious to atheist back to religious again. So please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to meet you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, likewise.
Um, so we kind of want to start off the first half. I guess we kind of want to talk with the first half of you going from religious to atheist. So you kind of just want to give us a background of what religion you started with, and that kind of transition of religious to atheist.
Yeah, so like a lot of people's journeys on such a complicated topic, there's a long version and a short version. But to make it pretty efficient, short, sharp, and to the point, I'll say that I was raised in a reasonably religious household, but that's
Mhm.
by British standards. So we don't wasn't really talked about that much. Went to a religious school. We had lots of ceremonies, and it was just kind of expected. It was a fairly dry, boring version of the Church of England. Um, and yeah, I kind of enjoyed it. I like the morality teachings. And although my dad was religious, when I started missing rugby training because I wanted to go to Sunday school, he was a little bit disappointed, to be honest, because he's
Mm,
big into rugby. So
I got you. So what we had mentioned it before, and like before we started recording, but what was the religion that you started off with?
yeah, so we'd say it's Methodism, but I have a feeling that means something quite different to an American ear. So for us, Methodism's quite dry, dull. It's more about the work ethic than really talking about God.
Hmm. Yeah, so I think, and I'm, this is all feelings, no facts, but maybe today, but you might be able to help me on this. But when I think of Methodist, I think of like like Southern
Yeah, because I know
religion.
down south in the U.S., like I think Methodist and what is it, Southern Baptist are the ones that come to mind. But
Yeah,
in terms of actually knowing the difference between, the denominations, I'm rather clueless.
yeah, um, yeah. I have no clue in terms of what the difference is. But yeah, I guess so. What happened that made you go from religious to atheist?
Yeah, I think it's a lot more common in Europe than it will be for you guys. But for me, I was going to Sunday school, and I started asking questions. And it
Mm,
was very
I don't.
open, but just classic, things a 13-year-old boy, smart but problematic. And as I started to, just devour as much information as I could about the history of the church, I started to look into, the Roman Empire and its power and its influence and how it kind of took over from Christianity when it used to be a little religious cult, and it's sort of these this big power structure merged with this little Jewish cult, and then changed it, and then started to have a pope and big golden temples, and you had to pay for your way to get out of purgatory and all this sort of thing, and that's like you learn a lot of that when you're raised in the sort of Protestant faith. But it gets weird because you're like, okay, but so much of our teachings are based on that translation of the Bible, and isn't it at all possible that although I still believe in God at this point and still believe in Jesus, like that his work has been corrupted by man and man's power and sort of all these sorts of questions. And yeah, the head of the Christian Union pretty much, I guess he got tired of me because he just said, "Look, you need to go home and pray, and when God gives you the answers, that's when you're welcome back to our little group." I was like, "Wow,
That's weird.
okay."
Yeah, he was like, we're gonna let God figure this one out.
Yeah, and that's one way to be told to fuck off, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly. The most elegant way possible. So, to your point, going back to what you said before, seems like people's journey either away from the church or, I guess, distancing themselves to a certain degree always begins with asking questions. And for you, you said that when you started asking questions, that's when, people became unhappy with the questions you were asking. So was the response you were getting, is that what made you question your faith? Like the way people were very defensive? Because it seems like they didn't give you very satisfying answers. They didn't say,
yeah.
how did Jonah survive in, fish for 3 days? And they didn't give you any sort of explanation, right? They're just like, well, he did because God allowed it, right?
And kids pick up on that very quickly, right? Like from an early age, kids are like, "Hey, like you say, you're getting a bit defensive there." Like that's a sort of spot. And yeah, I think it would have been different had I had, a stronger, wiser teacher who was like, well, was able to take me through the scripture. I don't think every questioning of a religion falls apart that easily. But in this case, it
Yeah.
did, and I think especially because I was at boarding school, like the church had sort of become a home away from home, and so them not being able to answer my questions really felt like a betrayal. Like it was really disappointing. And then I was an angry 13, 14 year old with access to the internet, and if you start googling,
Oh, yeah.
you
Teenage
know,
angst.
everything that the church has ever done wrong, wow, like that rabbit hole goes deep. So,
So what age did you start? I guess I don't even know if that's the right word, transitioning. I guess what age did you start realizing, that maybe this whole religious experience wasn't really for you, and you eventually converted to, I guess, atheism.
yeah, I'd say like 14, 15 was when I went from having doubts to like zealously pursuing atheism. And I use that word deliberately because I have met a few atheists who are religious in their fervor, like have a strong belief. And I understand why. Like I said, I do think it feels like a betrayal if you've been raised your whole life under a certain belief and then you start to doubt it. That does feel like you've been lied to, and it does. It hurts. And then, like you had with the last guest on your show, it really feels like sort of a power grab, which is quite
Mhm.
disappointing.
So how is being perceived as like an atheist in Europe? Because I don't really know how. Like, I don't know what to do. Maybe you can kind of chime in on this, but is being atheist kind of seen as a negative thing in Europe? Because in the United States, I don't know if people look at you funny if they say, "Hey, you're an atheist," you
Well,
know?
for example, you've never had an atheist president, right?
I
Oh.
believe, yeah, because atheism, yeah, because religion is also, for some strange reason, religion is like intertwined with politics. Like a person that doesn't believe in a higher power is frowned upon in U.S. government more or less, and it seems like that goes back to like I guess the age old days where like the Pope almost was a political figure. Well, the Pope is a political figure today, and even back then, he was more of a political figure. So yeah, yeah. To your point, yeah, you're very right. I don't think we've had a president that has not been religious, or at
Or at
least he's
least
not
not
been
admitted
outright.
to it, right?
Exactly, exactly. It's hard for me to believe Mr. Trump out here really believes in God. So
No comment. We won't get sucked into that rabbit hole so close to the
yeah.
election. But I think yeah, in Europe, it's deeply a-religious. I think,
Mhm.
especially because it's so pluralistic. You have the Protestants, Catholics, Muslims, but even then, I'd say the majority of people, when pushed, would probably say they were some kind of atheist, agnostic. I've had politicians recently have to apologize for having religious beliefs, or at least
Wow.
say
Wow.
it doesn't affect their politics. And that's been
Mm,
from two of the mainstream parties here in the UK. I think in Holland, Germany, you kind of have coalitions loosely based around religion. Obviously, Ireland, Northern Ireland, it's more of an issue. But it seems to just be a dwindling, dying thing. And we do often remark that most of the churches, because of poor attendance, are kind of getting turned into hipster cafes these days. So
Shit. Wait. So you're saying like the churches in the UK, they're kind of, since they're not being used, they're reusing them.
they've just run out of money. I mean, once people stop attending, it's all built on
Wow.
tithes. Uh, the public tolerance for giving tax money towards churches is pretty low. So at a certain point, once they go bankrupt, supply and demand, right? Yeah, they just end up
Yeah.
selling that very, very precious land, especially in a city, and converting it. It starts off first as a weekend concert hall, and then, soon it becomes a cafe.
This is off topic, but what's the craziest thing you've seen that's that changed from a church to whatever they need to use it for?
Definitely in Romania when there was a techno rave in a church. That was pretty cool. Like,
That I'm just picturing people like with headphones. You ever seen those like silent discos where
yeah.
you
Oh
put
yeah,
headphones
yeah,
on?
it's true.
But I'm just picturing that like in a church. I don't know why, and it's like very hilarious to me.
Well, this is where it gets funny. So there's a part of me that finds it funny and delights in the mismatch, and there's another part that finds it sacrilegious and offensive.
Yeah, let me take that back, saying that it was hilarious. Let me just say that it is a interesting
It's fine.
image.
Like, it is funny. It's okay. And look, let's be honest. Like, at certain
Yeah,
points, the church has abused and misused its power in dark
yeah,
ways. So,
hmm
I think now when you see churches beg for money out of desperation because they're closing, even a part of me like does laugh, because I think, about 100 years ago they had the power to force people to give them money and arrest them if they
hmm
didn't. So
hmm
so now when they beg like a charity, it is interesting.
I got you. So, the second half of your story, you said, I guess the first half is you went from Methodist
To
to
atheist.
atheist, and then let's talk about, your I guess, movement from atheist to your next religion, or not next religion. I don't want to say, because that sounds like you have another one,
Well,
like in
well,
the
why
back
not?
burner.
So honestly, there's a beauty there, in not thinking of it, your spiritual journey as a destination, but a
Hmm.
series of places you pause and think on, right? Like,
Yeah.
so I was out in Asia for a couple of years and came up close and personal with Buddhism, and despite
Oh
being
wow.
an angry atheist, started to see the beauty and sense of quiet contemplation and meditation. And
Hmm.
your first interaction with Buddhism, I think most people says, Buddha actually said something like, "Please don't make a religion out of me when I die."
Oh
It's one
wow.
of his
No.
quotes. But sure enough, they did, because that's what people do. You realize that it's not enough to just have it in a book somewhere. People need their marriages officiating, and their
Hmm.
funerals, these rites of passage, these bookmarks in life that culture, society, and personally we all need. And so you start to see that even though there's the sacred text which says one thing, once it interacts with people and community, it means another thing. And
That seems to be. Sorry to cut
no,
you
go for it.
off.
Go for it.
That seems to be the age-old, I guess, pattern we're in, that once it's touched by man's hands, it gets perverted to some degree. Buddha says, "Don't do this." What do we do? Exactly what he said not to do.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the funny thing was, because it was a different culture to the one I'd grown up with, so there wasn't this like strong connection. Um, I was a lot more sympathetic and empathetic to it. And once I'd gone through that, I realized that I wasn't extending that love to Christianity, right? But why was it
Mhm.
different? Like, it was the same sort of thing. It was a society. People had tried to find something bigger than themselves, this universal love. And sure, it's flawed as people, right?
Of
Hmm.
But
course, yeah.
what isn't, right? Like, name any institution that consists of people, and you will find flaws, unfortunately. Like,
Hmm.
So, so what when you discovered Buddhism, was it something that you gravitated towards because of it seems I don't want to say less of a structure, but it seems less black and white than Christianity tends to be. Christianity tends to want to give us right and wrong rules. You do this, you go to this place. You don't do that, you go to the other place. So, was that something that drew you to it, or what exactly, attracted you to something like Buddhism?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the exoticism, it's different, but also, yeah, like the death of religion in my heart before probably left a hole that I was drawn to. And again, if you look at the Buddhist teachings, it's very clear on there actually is clear teachings that say there is no such thing as absolute good and absolute evil. Like those are just human value judgments, and all there really is death and rebirth.
Mm,
Um,
that's interesting.
but again, when you talk to the average person and their understanding of religion and what it means to be a good Buddhist, it absolutely comes into contact with the old culture, old sexism. Women should be virtuous and get married before having sex, and all these things that you're like. I don't think Buddha actually had an opinion on that. That just is, I understand why
Yeah.
society has those rules. And there actually is, we're going to go off on a tangent here, but there's a beautiful theory called Darwin's Cathedral, which says that religion, and this is where I argue a lot with atheists, religion isn't a misadaptation or a weird cultural dead end, but a very important evolution, and that allows people to collaborate and work together in harmony in bigger and bigger groups. And you can kind of see that in the history, right? Like you used to have these small tribes fighting with each other, and then
Mhm.
eventually you had the whole of Europe unified under one belief system. Now, okay, that fell apart, but yeah, you can understand why it makes sense for groups to have the same pattern of behavior and respect and the unit of the family and these rules to follow, these guidelines.
Yeah, it's almost one of those things where it's like a glue that initially brings people together. Like you used the example of warring tribes and parties. How else can you get these people to talk to each other if they don't believe in, one common being that transcends, their understanding?
Sure. And
So,
the flip side atheists say is, oh, but what about the Crusades? And you're like, well, yeah, like there always is
mm,
identity politics, right? Like and
yeah.
humans be humaning, like there always is the evil. So I think my time in Asia kind of opened my mind that I had been pretty judgmental towards Christianity, but completely accepting of the same religious experience in other countries. And then it was when I went to university back in England again. I was, everyone that boring first year of university,
Mhm.
meeting religious people and lecturing them as an atheist.
Oh yeah, you were that guy,
Yeah,
huh?
I was that guy.
The second some guy's at the cafe and he's wearing a cross on around his neck, and you're like, "Let me tell you something, there, buddy."
Exactly. I was, yeah, like preaching, right? Like
Mm,
evangelizing.
yeah. Mm. It's like the same thing, just repackaged. Ironically enough.
Well, but this is it. I think we all have this instinct to believe we're on the right path, to look for like-minded people, to explain to people that disagree with our firmly held beliefs why they're wrong and why they're thinking about it wrong.
Mhm. Of course. So, explain to me how did you journey back from Buddhism to back to Christianity again?
Um, so that's the first time where I'll say that that's quite probably not the appropriate word, because the joy of Buddhism is that
Hmm.
it doesn't try and have a position on God, it doesn't have a
Hmm.
position on heaven. It kind of mentions the afterlife with reincarnation, but again, there's a wonderful Buddhist teaching where a bunch of villagers come up to Buddha and say, "So, tell me about God and heaven and all this," and he's just like, "I don't know, like sorry, like not my department."
Yeah.
And so I have met several people who are both Buddhist and Christian,
Oh,
and
okay.
so I
It's an interesting
wasn't
combination.
trying to convert from anything. I still had some Buddhist beliefs. But what really brought me back to Christianity was us being lucky enough to go to university in Canterbury, which is the birthplace of Christianity in England. You have the university there, where, yeah, like some Vikings famously killed a priest and then repented for their sins and converted to Christianity. You have Henry VIII killed the head of the Church of England in Canterbury, and there's a bunch of these Franciscan friars, and I was Franciscans, Dominicans, all walking the street in their robes, right, looking like Jedis. And I was lucky enough because I was working in the high street. I had a sales job. And just being there day to day just kept bumping into these lovely old men and getting in chats with them. And eventually one of the older brothers invited me into the friary for tea, very, very British religious experience. And in a very British way, like this is how most people do when there's a disagreement, we're just avoiding the topic. But I was, but he was really curious and was pushing me on it. And so I told him more or less the story I've told you guys now. I said my main problem with the church is that they should be providing moral leadership. And when I look towards things like gay rights, they act exactly how you'd expect, right? Like a bunch of old men with outdated views, when they should be leading morally. Instead, that they're doing the opposite, and that's really disappointing. And he shocked me with his response then. He said, oh yeah, like those people are the worst. I shouldn't hate them, but people that hide behind the church to excuse their homophobia is just the worst. And I was like, okay, like this guy's...
Yeah, that's a plot twist right there.
Yeah, this guy's thought about it, and he was like, oh, absolutely. Like, yeah, find me anywhere in the Bible where Jesus said anything against, like, anyone. Right, and he was all about let he who is without sin cast the first stone, and judge not lest ye be judged. So yeah, really shook me. And then the thing he said, it'll never leave me, was that for him, faith is the opposite of certainty. And he's this 80-year-old guy that has been in the church for almost all of his life since he was 15, I think.
Oh, wow.
And he said he spent every day for the last 30 years waking up and thinking that he might be praying to nothing, that God might not be real.
What?
But
that is a crazy concept, to think that like you still have devotion even though you're questioning what you dedicated your life to.
Yeah. And he said, but you know what? Like, all we try and do is, like, the Bible says God is love, and that love means like love for each other, love for your fellow man, love for the idea of making the world a better place. And so even if I have spent my life praying to something that isn't there, at least that faith has given me a reason to dedicate my life to making the world a better place. And so I'm okay with that.
That is an incredibly interesting interpretation. That is probably the most positive interpretation I've ever heard of. Like you're dedicating your entire existence to something, even if it's not there. Just the practice of doing it is making you a better person. And it seems like one of the few times in your life that's a win-win situation.
Yeah. And as an angry atheist, I had no counter to that. Oh God, I tear up now a little bit thinking about it. Like,
yeah,
that was deeply moving. And I sort of realized that it's okay, to not believe or whatever, but to go around telling people that their beliefs are stupid because you might think you know better. Yeah, that's definitely not the way.
Yeah. I think that might have changed my views on things. Like, I didn't even think about that. Well, it's a better bet. It's a better bet to follow something that makes you a kinder person and leaves a better impact than to spend your life trying to disprove something, because in turn, you might end up just being an asshole. Whether you're right or wrong, you're still an asshole, right?
Quite. And you couldn't have said it better, man. That's beautiful. And I think it's a shame that someone made Richard Dawkins the atheist pope, because he is just such a grumpy, cantankerous man. He doesn't do his cause any favors.
Yeah, and let me ask you your opinion on this. Do you believe that there's room for I guess scientific way of thinking and living and religious beliefs? Why do you think that everyone always has to put them at odds?
Look at
The
politics and
one-
power, right? And that's their weakness. So absolutely, there's room for both. If you look, the Pope has a team of physicists. He loved the last Pope or the one before, loved talking to Stephen Hawking.
Oh, really?
It's only sort of in places like America where there's this need to win and to have a monopoly on the truth, is that where the church embarrasses itself, right? And it is embarrassing. Like to go against a bunch of the world's greatest scientists and say, here's a 400-year-old interpretation of a 1,000-year-old book. You're like, oh, guys, come on. Like, why not leave the science to the scientists and
Yeah.
the rest to the stuff that they don't have a clear explanation for? And likewise, like, I understand why it happens, but I think when scientists try and explain away religion, I think they do themselves a disservice. So, as I said, I've annoyed a lot of scientists who've claimed that religion is an evolutionary dead end. I actually have a master's in evolutionary psychology, and there's quite a lot of evidence that, yeah, religion was a really important stepping stone for us as a civilization. And like,
Yeah, it was our first rule book, right?
yes,
You
and,
know.
and also even just in terms of purely Darwinistic theory, right? Like if you look at what happened during a pandemic, the pagans would all flee and get out of town, and so they would spread the religion with them, and they would leave people behind to die. Just tending to someone with food and water means that you're going to be much more likely for those people to survive and end up being immune to the disease. And so that like the birth of modern medicine comes from these monasteries and also our herd immunity to a lot of diseases. So yeah,
So
it
could
hurts me
you
when the two fight each other. I think they're so much richer if they would listen to one another.
could you say that it was a necessary stepping stone at the time?
Absolutely. And the funny thing is, so even the term stepping stone implies we're past it and over it. And I would say, as I've said in Europe, maybe we are. But my fear is, for atheists who would cancel the church, destroy the church, replace it with what? That's my question. It's easy to be a critic, right? But
Yeah,
but
exactly.
but we clearly have a need to belong, to form a community, to believe in something bigger than ourselves, to share morals and stories. I mean, at its best, the local village church serves as a weekly morality lesson, a support group, emergency charity for whatever's going on with someone, and a therapist for whoever needs it, right? And if you're going to
That's
just
true. It's like,
destroy all of that infrastructure, like you better have a plan.
yeah, replace it with something, not just, destroy it and then leave those people that may need it, to, just fend for themselves. And I think that's the thing where, to your point, you just said I think all human beings have a need to believe in something. I think even the atheists, have like there's something there. Like science is the explanation for why they exist and things of that nature. And for people that are deeply religious, they need to believe in some sort of supreme being, a higher power. And I even know for myself, I actually grew up in a split denominational household.
Right.
Mother was Catholic, father was Protestant, and I know as I've grown, I think right around the time for around college is when I just develop a disdain for denominations because of it being perceived as an interpretation of the rule book. So everyone can look at something that's clearly written one way, but bend it to fit their narrative. And I think that's the danger in it, kind of to your point where people, you see these, sometimes you see megachurch leaders, you see all these people manipulated, whether embezzling money or
Yeah.
engaging in inappropriate sexual acts. but they still are commanding the masses simultaneously. And I think that's the dangerous part about denominations. But it's also I can't. It's also to what you said before. You can't just take all that away. You
Yeah.
can't take all that structure away
No, no,
and
but
then
you're
just
right. The risk is blind faith. Um, and I think, it's okay to have faith in a God, but the
Mhm.
person that's claiming to have the keys to the kingdom, right? I'm the gatekeeper.
Mhm.
Like, give some money to my fund, and I'll have a good word with God on your behalf. That is dangerous, and it is right to call shenanigans on those people who would claim that power for themselves.
Mhm.
And that makes it difficult. Like, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So yeah, I don't know the fix for that, but I see it in every organization. Like, I see it in every political party, right? I see it in a sports team. Like,
Mhm.
whatever community you form, the people that rise to the top will be there because they're better at playing that political game than the others, and that becomes addictive, and it becomes cyclical as well. And the people that suck up to them, it just fuels itself, right? And so
Yeah.
and this is what I found listening to your last guest. He was criticizing the church and the power structures of it all, and I said, yeah, like, I wouldn't disagree with any of that, but I wouldn't say that's a unique problem to religion. It's a problem with every organization. It's something we always need checks and balances for.
And it seems like an issue that can't possibly be resolved because there's a quote from one of my favorite comic books, The Watchmen, where essentially they criticize superheroes are here to fill in the void and correct what's wrong with the government and the police force. But there's this quote
Mm,
that says, "Who watches the Watchmen?"
Mm.
And it's almost similar to religion. It's like you let's say we replace or something. Who's going to watch the people that are the replacement, and then their replacements, and then their replacements? And it seems like it's a issue that is almost it's perpetual. There's no permanent fix, and I guess maybe sometimes maybe the resolution to it is just being aware that absolute power corrupts no matter what it is. And like
mhm.
you said, any institution that can influence people on that scale needs to be monitored.
Yeah, from the inside as well, not just from the outside, because then it will be
Mhm.
perceived as an attack. But it's really
Mhm.
important from the inside as well, right? Like, and this is why a broad church is strong. Like, it's okay if you're on the left to disagree with someone about whether Biden or Bernie, or like, it's okay in your
Yeah.
church to that allow the black sheep, to allow the doubting Thomases.
Mhm.
It's absolutely necessary. And I think, if that's a little bit of a depressing summary, I'd say that the reason, like, wrap it up more positively, that the
Mhm.
reason Jesus became such a prophet and was so important is because he questioned the zeitgeist and the power structures of his time. And he
Mhm.
said, hold on, like, I don't think the rich and the powerful should inherit the earth. I think the meek should inherit the earth. I think we should be judged on how we treat the weakest in society.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Likewise, Buddha was an emperor and he rejected all of that. Um, I think I'd really recommend anyone listen to Krishnamurti. Are you guys familiar with him?
No,
No.
I'm not.
Mm-mm.
Beautiful philosopher. And in the 60s, 70s, India has a long tradition of these traveling gurus, right? And he came from that
Mhm.
family. And then, just as a lot of Americans and people started going to India and looking for spiritual enlightenment following the Beatles, right? Um,
Yeah, everyone did, right?
there was this, child prodigy genius, and this religion formed around him. And then, after a few years, he just had thousands of people following him everywhere he went, and he was raised as a prophet. That was his job. So he just had this bigger and bigger group, and eventually they formed the Order of the Star. And the first speech he gave to this order, which was like by this point thousands and thousands of people, was like, "My first act of head of the Order of the Star is to disband the order. I know why you're here. You're
Mhm.
desperately lost at sea, looking for something to follow, something to cling on to. But sadly, the only reason I have any wisdom to give is because I thought for myself. And so the answers you're looking for, you will only find if you search within yourself. And I think maybe that's the answer. Like, I think it's okay to have a community. In fact, I think it's absolutely necessary. And if your church is a healthy, loving community, then that's brilliant. And if you meet someone who, for them, their community is making them a nicer, better person, even if you're a strong atheist, maybe don't talk about the Crusades and why you think religion's silly. But likewise, I think that there's a danger of a complacency. There's always a danger in people thinking they're better than others because of the groups they're in. I mean, God, you can be a sports team fan and think you're better than the other team, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Literally, yeah. Some fans literally think they're better than an opposing city's
yeah.
team
So we
with
know
no
how
factual
irrational
basis behind it.
these
Yeah.
groups become. Right? It's just an instinct we have in us. So yeah, that's the sad truth of it is that there's no easy answers. I was looking for hope and certainty in atheism. I find a lot of people find that the certainty that there's definitely not a God, and I understand why they need that. But in my opinion, they're longing for it the same as a religious person, right? Like finding the answers exhausting. I wish I had easy answers, but none of us do.
No, yeah, 100%. I kind of want to end it with this thing that someone had I had posted a clip on our Instagram page, and it was talking about when Teddy was saying he considered himself Christian, but I don't like denominations, and this guy had commented saying that he considers himself Christian, but he lost trust in the church, and he felt like the church initially had good intentions, but when you add the corruption and gossiping and all that stuff, that's kind of when he just would rather build the relationship with God and him, just them two. And I kind of believe that. And that the journey between whatever entity or anything that you believe in should be between you two. And if the church may help, then that's good. Like you had mentioned before, that having someone or a community that's very loving and accepting and are kind of congruent with the views that you believe in, I think that's a great thing. But I think that the journey between the journey with you and whatever you believe in should be between you and whoever it is. Does that make sense?
It does. I do understand why people form these communities. Often, you inherit your religion. So most people are the religion of their parents, right?
Yeah.
Very true. Very true.
Yeah. So I understand why that forms. But yeah, ultimately, if your poker group is a bunch of nice guys with similar values and everyone's kind to each other, and you help someone move house if they needed a hand, that's kind of scratching that itch, fitting that need.
Yeah.
I hope if people are looking for a religion in their lives, they can find a community. But I think you're right. Like, communities can be toxic, and if it is, it's really sad. You hear cases of people who have doubts, have questions, and it tears families apart because the community's built around the idea that you can never question these beliefs. I think that's really sad. I wish more religious people had the faith to believe that their religion will survive some doubts and some questions, like that lovely Franciscan monk I spoke to. But I think there's so much insecurity, there's so much fear that they might question. But come on, if you really believe your God is omnipotent, you think he's not going to handle a few questions and a few people doubting? Like,
how fragile is the ego of your God if you ask one question, the whole earth starts burning?
Right? It's disappointing.
Yeah, exactly. Rather disappointed as I burn in eternal flame.
Well, like I said, we want to thank you for coming on and sharing your story. I think you've enlightened Tadiwa and kind of changed his perspective on, I guess, parts of religion. And I think I've, after talking with you, I've kind of also taken a different perspective with that story, that quote that you had mentioned. So thank you again for coming on.
Yeah, and
You
likewise,
had
gents.
mentioned,
Like, I didn't come here to convert you. I found the conversation. It was enlightening for me too.
yeah,
It's good to have. I think that's the key. If you enter a conversation trying to persuade someone, then no one learns anything, right? So this was just a really interesting conversation. I find your podcast really interesting because of that, and yeah, thank you very much.
Well,
Appreciate
thank you
it.
for coming on. It really means a lot to us. I think
yeah.
by far I can say you are the most intelligent guest we have ever had.
Far too kind. Flattery will get you everywhere. So.
So you had mentioned before that you had a podcast, and what was the name of the podcast, and where can they find you, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, Beyond Binary Thinking. So we're available anywhere you get your podcasts. What we try and do is tackle complicated issues where there's a lot of certainty, and just become comfortable exploring the doubt, the nuance, and the grey areas. So it's not a debate show. It's not a centrist show. Where we deep dive on some, as I say, pretty controversial topics. And I think the three of the co-hosts are quite comfortable disagreeing with each other. We actually don't see eye to eye on many things, but that's okay. Like, if you're looking for a clear narrative where we tackle a thorny issue and at the end tell you what the answer is, you might find it frustrating. It's three people with three different opinions happily disagreeing with each other and leaving no resolution at the end.
No, I really think that we should have these type of conversations, and I think just even being exposed to them is, what is the word? It's invaluable, because I think that just having the exposure to a differing point of view makes you a better person.
Yeah,
But that's
and I understand for like entertainment purposes why the format of wrestling, like in the blue corner, in the red corner, and then they punch each other until someone's not standing. Like I get it; it's an easy to be entertained by format. I just it's not how most conversations with the people around us should go.
yeah,
Very true. Very
yeah,
true.
And I think,
definitely.
if you try and destroy someone's argument, then you're not really trying to understand it. And often, if someone's disagreeing with you, there is a lot of opportunity to learn there. So I ask everyone, even if you disagree with someone, try and hear them out before you try and persuade them.
Yeah, 100%. That's a really, really great message. Well, thank you, like I said, for coming on. If you like this podcast, smash that like button, follow button, wherever you do follow us, listen to us. Follow us on our social media platforms. Instagram, Puzzled Minds Podcast. Twitter is Puzzled Minds Pod. And our email is puzzledmindspodcast@gmail.com, where we do encourage everyone to submit a topic of discussion. In a few moments, you'll hear a promo from the Disc Dump podcast talking about his Master of Horror movies that he'll be watching, and kind of just be on the lookout for that all throughout the month of October. Last but not least, thank you again at Official Block of the Week for the weekly Instagram episode cover artworks. Other than that, everyone stay puzzled.
Halloween approaches, and the Disc Dump podcast is doing something special. We are watching all of the Masters of Horror movies, and we are going to be releasing an episode for each individual one. Look for it all October long on the Disc Dump podcast.